what we want to do now is we're going to post in the chat box a link to a Google Doc where we're going to ask for people to put their ideas in, and this can be something where, you know, it'll be anonymous. You don't have to identify yourself. If you want to identify yourself, you can, of course. But it's really a way for us to begin to understand the priorities for our continued involvement in the next year or two. One of the things that as I mentioned just a moment ago, is there will be mini grants available, and we also have to figure out where we can make the most difference. What are the levers where our resources from the 3 universities can be best used? And so what you share with us is going to be really important in terms of, you know, what needs or priorities or opportunities do you see in your town or county or the Northern Neck as a whole for increasing your resilience? And so are there workshops, for example, or trainings, or if you haven't yet set up a resilience committee, do you want or need help with that? Is there specific kinds of research that we might be able to do, or data needs? We're really looking wide open for where you might see the needs. What do you see as the needs for the historically excluded or underrepresented populations? So that's the first big question on the Google Doc, where we're looking for your input. And if you, for whatever reason, have difficulty accessing that, you can also just put your ideas into the chat box. So I'm going to outline the 3 big questions, and then we'll start with the first and circle back. But I want to have you thinking about all of these. The second big question is, what do you see as the biggest challenges still for advancing resilience that need attention? Some of the things that were identified in the COVID rapid response research and investigation that was done was, of course, infrastructure. We know environmental protections, health and well-being is a big category. It's got lots of stuff in there. Social equity, transportation is a huge issue that even if things are available to people, if people can't get to it, you know, it's not very helpful. Communication and networking continues to surface as a big need. And funding, of course. So that's why we spend a lot of time on that. But what do you see as the biggest challenges, more specifically than a big category, but something specific we can wrap our arms around, right? We're looking for something like that. And then the third big question is to help us learn. Every time we have worked with a region or a group of localities, we feel quite seriously about trying to learn and continue to adapt the process. So as we move forward and start to work with the Middle Peninsula, they would be most grateful if we would learn from you and do a better job. Anything about the scoring process or the workshops or involving community people, getting the word out, anything at all. So those are the 3 big questions that are on the table in the Google Doc, and it has been posted in the chat. So we'll circle back now to the first question and just open it up, and people can unmute, people can post in the chat, people can put in the Google Doc, and our people will take your information in whatever way you want to share it. So starting back up at the top, what do you see as the needs, priorities, and opportunities specifically for either your town or county or the region as a whole to increase resilience? Where would you put those needs, priorities, and opportunities for our work? Where would you like to see us put our efforts?
Tanya, one need that was raised already in the discussion was the one about a platform for data sharing or data input.
was just noticing that Chad has asked, is this just around flood or disaster preparedness or community resilience in general? Really, we are very interested in the flood and disaster preparedness, but if a community is not resilient in general, then that really impacts its ability to be resilient to floods and disasters. So Chad, the answer is all of the above. I think that's one of the really big lessons from what we've been experiencing, not only from COVID, but past hurricanes that have hit, is that it is a whole of community approach that is going to be the most successful. One of the things I'd love to dive into, maybe hear more about, is this idea of greater opportunities for collaboration between local governments and with residents and community organizations. I'm just wondering if anybody has an idea of what that might look like. Yeah,
Tanya, it looks like the RAFT is what it looks like. I mean, if I'm being honest, we had such a wide, diverse group of implementation team members with each locality, ranging from the various departments, social services, health department. It wasn't just local government staff. You had residents, you had community organizations involved, you had Friends of the Rappahannock, the Soil and Water Conservation District. And putting all of those different heads together allows you to operate in kind of a safe space where you can really discuss the needs and desires going forward, where it's not politically influenced in any sort of way. And it also takes some pressure off the local government staff and administration by having a group that can operate independently and make recommendations to that administration. So I think that's what that looks like, the RAFT.
That's really, it makes, I don't know why it makes me laugh, but it makes me laugh, John. So I'm digesting what you're saying and thinking that we may also want to think about different ways of bringing people together. Maybe there's ways of bringing people together around specific issues. So that could be something we could consider, that maybe there's a regional gathering with people from, the different localities tackling a specific issue. I don't know. Really trying to understand where we can make a difference. I see what's interesting: classes, workshops, discussions with collaboration at public meeting places, churches, libraries. That's really interesting. Planning to protect populations in our communities who are already marginalized. Yes. One of the things that is really interesting about the COVID rapid response investigation is the identification of a large number of different types of populations that we might not necessarily think about, who get left out, whether it's disabled, seniors, our youth, those who are living in, abusive home situations, things like that, that need to be thought about in this context of resilience as we move forward.
I was just going to add on to that point and some of the comments in the chat about, engagement and participation and making sure that there are representatives from different community organizations as well as, individuals within populations. I think one of the things that the COVID rapid response report revealed for us is there were a number of critical service providers and community organization members and volunteers who participated in interviews and focus groups. And that was a great format for allowing folks that have limited capacity and can't commit to monthly implementation team meetings to elevate concerns and priorities. But I think is something that, we can continue to consider, and, as a region, as the RAFT team, as resilience committees, how do you use honoraria and things like that to make it possible for more people to participate and also create these other avenues and ways for people to provide input on particular issues without having to commit beyond what they're able to, commit to a process.
Yeah, really important that it's not placing a burden on people, but providing an opportunity and helping to make it possible for them to participate, to have their voices heard. So let's move to the second question and the third. I'm watching our time. I want to make sure that all of these that people are focusing on, have the time to put in their ideas about the biggest challenges, and also any suggestions and lessons learned that you want to offer to us. So please go ahead and share your ideas about this in the Google Doc or in the chat, or just unmute. We're happy to have you chat with us. I see John's comment, perhaps that approach could be undertaken periodically. Yeah, that could be part of what is done, is to have some kind of, to me, it reminds me of this constant refrain and theme that keeps coming up around the communication networks are so critical and vital to successful resilience. And I know we discovered that on the Eastern Shore, that there were, even though everybody knows each other in our rural communities, I live in a rural community, they still may be siloed and may not be networking in ways that are supporting broad resilience. So that could be that could be a mechanism, John, possibly to think about, is some kind of regular forum, so that if these organizations are not able to regularly participate in implementation teams, that the ongoing resilience committees, rather, that those resilience committees can still be informed and stay up to speed on what the needs are.
I think trying to break down those silos is helpful. We're very fortunate in the Northern Neck to have many community organizations that focus on very specific populations that they serve. And they all do a really great job of representing their communities and providing services and resources to the residents. But coming together on a regular basis to collaborate and make sure you're not stepping on each other's toes, and making sure that you're not duplicating or replicating efforts is really important. So there could be a greater effort in the Northern Neck to align these community organizations and bring them together. That's not a role that the PDC or localities play, but I could see a resilience committee approaching these communities for their particular locality and saying, hey, can you come together and address the needs of this very specific population?
Tanya, this is Wee. Going back to kind of moving on to your question about biggest challenges, one of the ideas that was typed in was infrastructure.
Yes, and more.
I'm kind of, and so I'm kind of curious if we could have a little bit of this discussion about what is it about infrastructure that is the challenge? Is it that the infrastructure is vulnerable? Is it that we have the wrong type of infrastructure in the wrong places, that we might need more green infrastructure versus gray? That the gray infrastructure that we currently have, is it inadequate infrastructure and we need more? So I'd like to just have a little bit more of a conversation about that, because I think this really kind of hits the issue right, square on the nose here about infrastructure being a challenge. But what are the dimensions of infrastructure that is causing kind of this challenge, and is the root of the struggle?
This is John Bateman. I'm gonna make a comment, and then I'm gonna tee it up for Whitestone, Warsaw, and Colonial Beach to chime in. But when we talked about, every one of our localities during the RAFT identified the need for emergency communication strategy and improving how we communicate. And that was really brought on by deficiencies that were identified during the pandemic. And you really can't have widespread and thorough communications without access to broadband internet. And that's something that the Northern Neck Planning District Commission is focused on through our broadband initiative, and have been funded through the VADI program and other funds to create universal broadband coverage here in the Northern Neck. It's a perfect example of a public-private partnership coming together to meet a very specific need. And that's going to do wonders for going forward and how we can communicate with the residents of the Northern Neck, whether it's emergency preparedness or just resilience in general. That's one form of infrastructure that's being addressed on a regional basis. Locally, there's a lot of stormwater needs.
Great, thanks, John. And so localities, towns, counties, tell us more about. We do want to know. We are very curious. We want to know, as we said, what specifically are the needs and challenges.
This is Pat Frere from the town of Whitestone. I'm a the agent. Infrastructure for us also includes infrastructure that wasn't there before, but also for the other towns, aged infrastructure. And specifically for the town of Whitestone, it was no public sewage at all. The town was 100% dependent, all the residences and businesses, on septic systems for sewage disposal. And it took a lot to put together the necessary funding from multiple sources: the U.S. Department of Agriculture through grant and loans, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Virginia Department of Housing Community Development, the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project, to get our phase 1 sewer project going, which is probably 200 connections, about 150 residences and 50 businesses. But why that's important, out of all those in the phase 1, the average age of the septic systems was maybe 48 years old. Out of those, at least half had already failed once and been replaced. And I believe David Fridley might still be on here too. And I think of the ones that had not yet failed, there were only 7 Dayak reserve areas for those, 80-something houses. And then we also had a number that were on pump and haul. So it's right there where we are, within half a mile of the headwaters that flow into Carter's Creek, Annapoison Creek, Pleasant Banks Cove, and the Rappahannock River. So I mean, it's business resiliency, community resiliency, but also natural habitat protection. It links so many ways, but a lot of the other towns already have infrastructure, but it's in need of upgrading. You can only hit your taxpayers up so much for the needed improvements over time. It really does involve outside dollars to address huge upgrades to, say, a treatment plant, especially if it discharges into a tidal water body or a receiving stream and is regulated by DEQ instead of VDH. That's just my 2 cents, and I'm sure the other towns probably have something to say along with that.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks so much. I think that's really helpful.
I think Pat's point really kind of also identifies kind of the ripple effect of infrastructure challenges, which might also kind of, I think, force us to think a little bit more broadly about how resilience projects are funded, because a lot of the funding for infrastructure does tend to be a little bit more siloed. So, VDOT might provide some funding, or, the FHWA might fund transportation projects. The septic systems might be more isolated in terms of sources of funding, but the ripple effect of failed infrastructure are not necessarily within solely, transportation or, stormwater. So I think that does kind of point, to me, illustrate one of the advantages of the Community Flood Preparedness Fund as an option to think about how to fund, projects that are tied together to achieve resilience more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to be very articulate about this, but I'm thinking that the same kind of ripple effect happens with that was really surfaced by this COVID report, that people who are vulnerable to begin with, when something happens, a disaster of any kind happens, is that their challenges are multiplied and become even more dire. And there's a ripple effect. And so a similar kind of ripple effect happens, is that if we're not taking care of our people in a way of helping them to be more resilient to begin with, not in disasters, then when disasters hit, it's going to be really, it's just going to really be compounded. So we've got to, in sort of what you might call the softer human health and well-being services, there's a similar kind of, we have to think more broadly. And I don't know how we've got to find a way to wrap those kinds of things into the resilience funding. And I'm not sure what the answer is. You might be able to figure that out. All right, I'm watching, yeah, and I'm open, if people have ideas about that, yeah, please put them down or share or speak up. Yeah, John, no question. Co-benefits will get greater support. I'm watching our time, and I very much do want to hear any kinds of ideas that you all would have for ways to improve this process. And so I want you to give some thought and attention to that as well. Ways that we can improve any aspect, from the beginning scoring to the workshop where the 1-year resilience action checklists are set up, to involving community people, getting the word out, all of that. Please share your thoughts.